But let's shift over to an offense that, for a lot of people, is one they're staying away from, one they're almost fading completely because of the guys that are supposed to be the quarterbacks this year, and it's the Denver Broncos. And I want to really drill down on the question, can the Broncos pass catchers produce with Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater this season? And for me, the primary path to upside for these pass-catching weapons for Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Noah Fant is probably just Drew Lock getting better, taking that step up that we want him to take in year 3 if we're invested in the Broncos in fantasy. It's just not something I necessarily want to bet on in fantasy drafts right now.
Yikes.
But for where some of these guys are going, I think they're worth drafting.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, Sutton and Jeudy are both going in the 6th round. Noah Fant is going in the 8th round, and those are the guys we're really going to be targeting here. I know they have Tim Patrick and KJ Hamler, but you and I will both agree those are more late-round flyers. If someone ahead, DFS. If someone else on the depth chart gets hurt, they become maybe streamable, a little bit more interesting waiver names. But we're really talking about Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, and Noah Fant, and I like them all at their value. I did mention Jeudy and Sutton in the 6th, Fant in the 8th, so I think they're fine at those values, but there's a lot of actually hype around a couple of these guys right now. Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton are generating a lot of buzz in dynasty leagues, and now that's transitioning over to redraft leagues, even though the Denver Broncos offense doesn't get people that excited. And I've been bullish on both of these guys as well, but I'm starting to cool off a little bit. And I gotta paint this out for you, Steph, because when I really started breaking down the numbers and what I expect this Broncos offense to look like, I got a little bit concerned about the overall volume and the expectations that we should have for both of these wide receivers, because you look at Denver back in 2019, okay? 2 years ago, they were the 10th ranked scoring defense, very, very good defense. They were 27th in pass attempts and 29th in plays. So that's Denver Broncos football. They don't have a quarterback. They have a defensive-minded coach. So they're going to want to be a good defensive team that doesn't have to push the pace. And that's what they did in 2019 with some success, relatively. Last season, we saw their defense come back to the 25th scoring defense. So their defense took a step off of a cliff. A lot of that was due to Von Miller getting hurt. They moved up to 19th in pass attempts and 15th in play. So even with a terrible defense, they were still middle of the pack in terms of their offensive pace of play. And when I look to 2021, you look at what this team has done defensively, and I think they're going to be one of the top units in the league. They get Von Miller back. They sign Ronald Darby and Kyle Fuller at cornerback, 2 very, very good veterans. And they draft Patrick Surtain in round 1.
Huge.
So this defense got so much better from a personnel standpoint. Pro Football Focus ranks every unit of a team heading into the season. They have the Broncos D-line ranked 10th. They have the linebackers ranked 4th and the secondary ranked 1st. So the expectation is for this to be a lock of a top 10 defense, maybe a top 5 defense in 2021. Wow. And with that being the case, if they're able to shut people down, I think we're going to see that 2019 mold where they had a really good defense and they were low in attempts and they were low in pace of play. And that concerns me for the overall output of this offense in 2021. And you mentioned Drew Lock, Teddy Bridgewater, the quarterback play improving. Obviously, that's going to help the wide receivers. But if the volume isn't there, I still don't know that it can be done, because we have seen examples in the past. Say we give them the benefit of the doubt. Drew Lock, Teddy Bridgewater, whoever ends up being the quarterback, plays decent, but the volume's low. We've seen examples of low volume passing attempt teams supporting 2 elite fantasy football wide receivers. We saw it from Minnesota last season. We've seen it from Seattle. And in Tennessee, we expect it to happen this year with A.J. Brown and Julio Jones. So it's not that it can't be done, but when you look at Minnesota, when you look at Seattle, and you look at Tennessee, they all have a few things in common. And the first is an efficient quarterback. So that is step 1. You mentioned it. That's step 1. You got Kirk Cousins, Ryan Tannehill, and Russell Wilson, who were all top 8 in terms of passer rating last season. Bridgewater and Locke were 22nd and 32nd, respectively.
Yikes.
So they do need to step it up. Second, when you look at those teams, they don't have a tight end of consequence in terms of targets. Jacob Hollister was the target leader in Seattle at the tight end position last season with 40. Irv Smith in Minnesota with 43 targets. And then Johnny Smith only had 65 targets. Like, he got some hype last season, but he was not being heavily targeted. He's not there this season with the Julio Jones, A.J. Brown hype. And I know Ferkser is still there, and he's going to see some targets, but he's not commanding this massive target share. So if you're going to have these funneled 2 wide receivers, you don't want a tight end of consequence in terms of target volume. And Noah Fant last year had 93 targets in 15 games. So you've got an athletic tight end on a 100-target pace, and he is going to command some volume. So that's just another red flag for me for Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy both being effective at the same time. And then you just have to look at the talent. In Seattle, you have DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. So elite. In Tennessee for this season with Julio and A.J. Brown, that's insane. And then last year, Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen's a great combo. So I think Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy are great players. The potential is there. But you hear the names I'm saying, like DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, A.J. Brown, Julio Jones. Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy are not on that level yet. So all those things coming together makes me concerned that both Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton are going to return on their ADPs. And honestly, I think there are 2 outcomes in Denver. One is that both Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton have fine seasons. They're somewhere from wide receiver 20 to 24, low-end wide receiver 2s. And for where you got them in the 6th round, you're happy. They were solid, but they weren't league winners. The other outcome I see is one of those 2 guys really taking a step up and taking over the passing game in Denver, over-indexing in touchdowns, over-indexing in big plays, and that coming at the expense of the other guy. So, for example, if we see Jerry Jeudy come out for 1,300 yards and 12 touchdowns, I think that's going to mean Courtland Sutton, from a volume perspective, is going to have under-indexed a little bit in the touchdown category and on some of those big plays. So in that scenario, you'd be happy with Jeudy, not happy with Sutton. It could flip-flop because I think both guys are talented. So I think both of these guys being top 15 is out of the question. But I do still think in the 6th round, you can return on that ADP. So I know that was very long-winded, Stef, but it's a long way of saying I like both players. I like both of their talents. But I don't think they're as big of a steal in the 6th round as I originally thought.
Great points right there. And I want to take a second to dive a little bit deeper into the quarterback situation because, as you laid it out, the true path to that upside being there, unless, barring injury, barring some crazy change in offensive philosophy that we can't bet on, we got to hope that either Drew Lock ascends or that Teddy Bridgewater can get the job done. I mean, last year, Drew Lock was Ryan Fitz magic without the magic. I mean, he was 4th in air yards per pass, 11th in the NFL in deep ball attempts in just 13 games, but he had a 16 to 15 touchdown to interception ratio.
Yikes.
Think about that. 16 touchdowns on 13 games. That's not getting it done. He couldn't complete a pass. He had the lowest completion percentage of any NFL quarterback. The absolute lowest. Worse than Sam Darnold, worse than Dwayne Haskins, worse than Daniel Jones, worse than Nick Foles and Andy Dalton. It's awful. And he was 37th in the league with 32 teams in true completion percentage per player profiler, where they remove throwaways, they remove drops. So looking at true completion percentage, it's even worse. I think the only way he starts more than half the season is if he does take that step up, which would be a good sign for the weapons. And then we look at Teddy Bridgewater. His career path is essentially, he went to New Orleans and perfected playing the Drew Brees role for an offense, but without all the fun parts. So he's super accurate. He's almost the antithesis of Drew Lock. He's super accurate, 5th highest completion percentage in the NFL last year. He can rack up yardage in a game, and if you look at his yardage totals on the season, they're not an eyesore, they're not terrible, but he's racking up that production with dink and dunk conservative passes, and it's fine for fantasy. I think it gives all these pass catchers a nice floor. They can be fine wide receiver 2s, but Teddy Bridgewater, what we do know is that he's not going to absolutely crater the production of these wide receivers like Drew Lock will, and we just saw Teddy Bridgewater in a very slow pace of play offense. Granted, they did have a terrible defense in Carolina last year, but Teddy Bridgewater supported 2 wide receivers with Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore. They were both over 1,000 yards last year. Both of them finished the year as low-end wide receiver 2s. Neither of them had more than 4 touchdowns because just like Drew Lock and his low touchdown volume, Teddy Bridgewater only threw 15 touchdowns in 15 games and he had a 3% touchdown rate, dead last in the NFL. So he wasn't an electric passer. That's really never been the player that he is, even starting his career back in 2014 in Minnesota. He rarely throws the ball deep, less than 4 times per game on average. So when I look at Teddy Bridgewater coming in with Drew Lock cratering, it's like, where does the upside really come in here? But I think the floor is going to be enough. And to your point, maybe Jerry Jeudy can play that Robbie Anderson role. Courtland Sutton can play that DJ Moore role, which for their ADPs, I think is completely fine. Just not getting necessarily overly excited.
Steph, who do you think starts at quarterback this year? If you had to guess, I know we're still before camp. The Rodgers rumors are still swirling, but you and I both believe that's not happening. You never know. But if it's Drew Lock versus Teddy Bridgewater, who do you think's the starter week 1, and who do you think starts more games this season?
I think they're going to start with Drew Lock just because he is the guy.
Interesting.
But this thing could turn south really,
I think they're
really
going
quick.
Teddy. I think they're going Teddy.
You think they're done?
Based on what we've laid out with the strong defense wanting to win these low-scoring games, it's going to be less about what these quarterbacks can do, but more about what they don't do. It's going to be less about the amazing arm talent across your body, 60-yard bomb across the field, and more about not throwing a stupid interception in the fourth quarter. And in Teddy Bridgewater, I think they can get that game manager. You think about the Jimmy G role in San Francisco went to the Super Bowl.
Great point.
If the Broncos are going to make it, they're going to get there with that mold rather than with the Patrick Mahomes gunslinger mold that Drew Lock in an alternate universe would bring this offense. So I think it's going to be Teddy. I think it should be Teddy, but who really knows?
Yeah, I think Teddy will start more. The thing that holds me is not only Drew Lock was the guy, they also invested an early second-round pick into Drew Lock.
Yeah.
I think they're going to try to give him one more chance, give him one more true offseason to prepare, see what he can do, and if things start to go south, it's to that game manager role.